Good evening and welcome to the January 3rd, 2022 regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to ask Councilmember Rob Wood to lead us in the pledge tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Rob. Next item on our agenda is reflection, and I'll just send our best wishes. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday season, and want to wish everyone a happy new year and look forward to working with you and for you in 2022 and trying to do the very, very best we can for the city of Gaithersburg, keeping us the greatest city in the world. And with that, let's have a quick moment of silence. Thank you very much. Next item, I should say the next, 100 items. And actually, Lynn, since Ryan, I just got a text from Ryan now that he's having technical difficulties, but is attempting to log on momentarily. Can we still have these votes? Because we have a quorum here, even though we're going to have some abstentions. We're good, right, Lynn?
We are, with the exception of for the meetings where it was the past council, if there was another council member absent, because there would only be one person available to vote on that this evening until Ryan joins. We should probably defer on those until Ryan joins the meeting.
I think there's only one set of minutes here in which Rob Wu was absent. Rob, do you know which one that is? Or Doris, you know which one it is, right?
The 29th. Nope. Hold on a sec. Absent the 13th, December 13th. So that's the entire council.
Okay, well that one we'd be able to vote anyway because Lisa and Jim can vote on that. So, okay. Well, then we're going to start a long trip down memory lane here as we go through minutes, starting with the minutes from the regular session held on September 3rd, 2019. Neil Harris.
I move approval of the minutes of the regular session held on Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Abstain.
And Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, so that carries 2-0 with 2 abstentions, Council members McNulty and Henderson. Next set of minutes are from the regular session held on October 21st, 2019. What is the pleasure of the council?
Move approval, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Neil?
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
And Council Vice President Harris.
Aye.
Okay, and Councilmember McNulty.
Abstain.
Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, so that carries 2-0 with 2 abstentions, Council members McNulty and Henderson. Next set of minutes we have are from the regular session on January 6th, 2020. What's the pleasure of the council? Neil.
I move approval of the minutes of the regular session held on January 6th, 2020.
Okay,
Second.
Rob, we got a second. Okay, I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
I meant Council Vice President Harris.
No
Councilmember
need to
McNulty.
stand on ceremony with me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. McNulty
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, so that carries 2-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have the minutes from the regular session on February 18th, 2020. What's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval.
Okay, Neil.
Second.
All right, I will call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, that carries 2-0 with 2 abstentions, Council members McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have minutes from the regular session on March 2nd, 2020. What is the pleasure of the council? Neil.
I move approval of the minutes of the regular session from Monday, March 2nd, 2020.
Okay. Rob.
Second.
Okay. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, that carries 2-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have the minutes from the regular session on March 16th, 2020. What is the pleasure of the council?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Okay,
Second.
Neil. Second, okay. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, and I see Ryan Spiegel joining us right now. Ryan, are you with us? Maybe not. Okay, well, we'll just leave this vote where it is. We have motion carries 2-0 with 2 abstentions. Next, we have, by the way, as a matter of history for anybody, when this gets posted, it's kind of interesting to look at those minutes from March 16, 2020, because it's right before lockdown and we're all talking about it and things are haywire. So from a historical perspective, it's kind of an interesting set of minutes. Next, we have the minutes from the regular session on April 20th, 2020. What is the pleasure of the council? Neil.
Move approval of the minutes of the regular session of Monday, April 20, 2020.
Okay. Rob.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. Ryan, can you hear me? I cannot hear you.
Still choppy.
Okay, yes, I hear you now. Okay, cool. All right, I'm calling the roll. We're on the minutes from April 20th, 2020. Okay, so Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, so that carries 3-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have the minutes from the regular session held on May 4th, 2020. What is the pleasure of the council? We had a rhythm going, guys. It was great. Neil.
I move approval of the minutes of the regular session from Monday, May 4th, 2020.
Okay, Rob.
I'll second, but I was waiting for Ryan to join in. Maybe he
Oh.
wanted. So,
Okay. Maybe he'll get the next one. Okay, I'm going to call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, so that carries 3-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have the minutes. We're almost through this. We're more than halfway through. We have the minutes from the regular session held on June 15th, 2020. What is the pleasure of the council? Rob.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Okay. Do we have a second? Neil.
Second.
Okay. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, that carries 3-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have, that was just May 4th, right? Who's keeping
No.
track here? Was that June 15th?
Yes.
Okay. There's just a long list, forgive me here. This is the minutes from the regular session on August 17th, 2020. What is the pleasure of the council? Ryan.
Move approval.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, so that carries 3-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, we have the minutes from the regular session held on February 16th, 2021. What is the pleasure of the council? Ryan.
I will move approval.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Abstain.
Okay, carries 3-0 with 2 abstentions, McNulty and Henderson. Next, now we're getting into the modern era. Next, we have the minutes from the work session held on November 29th, 2021. What's the pleasure of the council? Jim McNulty.
Mr. Mayor, I move the approval of the minutes of the work session held November 29th, 2021.
Okay.
I second.
Please. All right, I will call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Aye.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
All right, carries 5-0. Next, we have the minutes from the work session on December 13th, and this is the one at which I think Councilmember Wu was absent. What is the pleasure of the council? Lisa,
Mr. Mayor, I move for the approval of the work session minutes for December 13th, 2021.
okay. Jim,
Second.
okay, I will call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Abstain.
okay. Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Aye.
Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
Okay, so that carries 4-0 with 1 abstention, Councilmember Wu. All right, we've made it. We are basic. I think we're up to date on minutes, so we're doing great. Next on our agenda is presentations. Let me just get to that part on my agenda here. The first one. That's right. Okay, so the first one we're doing a proclamation. Tech team, if you could bring up the proclamation for our week of service, perfect. So this is a proclamation Mayor and Council designating January 15th through the 22nd as a week of service in the city of Gaithersburg. We are proud to issue a proclamation to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He devoted his life to advancing equality, social justice, and economic opportunity for all. And he challenged us to build a more perfect union, reminding us that everyone has a role to play when he said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" Gaithersburg residents are invited to honor the life and teachings of Dr. King by participating in a week of service with activities coordinated by the Montgomery County Volunteer Center, January 15th through the 22nd. Many of the projects can be done from the safety of your own home, including making fleece blankets for foster children, sending notes of encouragement to veterans, and making magazine coasters for seniors. You can find details about these and other service projects at montgomeryserves.org. City of Gaithersburg is collecting gently used clean coats and winter apparel for Gaithersburg High School students. Drop them off at the Activity Center at Borough Park through January 18th. And you can see the proclamation on the screen. Thank you very much, Tech Team. We'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the third quarter 2021 Employee Recognition Awards. And I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Tanisha Briley.
Thank you, Mayor Ashman. I am excited to help kick off our year with appreciation of a few members of our amazing staff with our 2021 third quarter Employee Recognition Awards. Just as I started practicing 2022, we're still now saying 2021, so I may screw that up a few more times. Congratulations to Pete Ibrahim and the Youth Services Division team, who are the winners of our third quarter, which runs July 1 through September 30th, 2021 Employee Recognition Award. The winners were nominated by their peers, and final selections were made by the Employee Recognition Committee, which is comprised of employees from each city department who donate their time in service of their fellow peers. Pete Ibrahim is with the Gaithersburg Police Department Parking Enforcement Office. He is the coordinator of parking enforcement, and he was nominated for taking the initiative to organize, coordinate, and execute a pedestrian safety operation in the Crown Farm Business District. He was also recognized for his initiative and dedication in providing assistance to parking enforcement officials, city departments, individuals, business owners, and homeowners associations. He's committed to serving the public, and he routinely responds to questions and concerns, often via email outside of his normal working hours. Congratulations to Pete. And our team award goes to Youth Services Division, which is in the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Department, and includes staff members Julius Arnold, Jake Hersom, Keegan Aragon, Anna Bonilla, Jocelyn Thomas, and Paul Barrow. The team was nominated for their work and commitment to providing programs for Gaithersburg youth and for bringing a sense of belonging and community to the youth they encounter. By encouraging participation, providing mentoring, and serving as excellent role models, the team members were credited with creating lasting bonds and giving each child a positive experience they will never forget. Congratulations to all of our winners of the 2021 Third Quarter Employee Recognition Awards. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanisha. And we join you in congratulating Pete and our Youth Services Division team. They do fantastic work, and we're so lucky to have them. So with that, the next item on our agenda is public comments. This is the time the mayor and council like to hear from anybody who'd like to speak on any topic that's not a public hearing topic. We do have one public hearing tonight. It's about an emergency ordinance to limit or prohibit rent increases during a specific period of time through May of this year. So if you're here to speak on that topic, hold off for now because we're going to do that next. But if you're here to speak on any other topic, we'd love to hear from you. We ask that you state your name and address or neighborhood if you feel more comfortable. We ask that you keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes. If you have more than 3 minutes worth of material to deliver, you're welcome to send it to us in writing, and we'll consider it just the same as oral testimony. And tech team, if you could play the instructional video for anybody who'd like to speak, that would be great.
Good evening. If you've connected to the meeting tonight via Zoom and you're on a desktop or a laptop and you wish to make a public comment, we can't currently see or hear you. What you need to do, please, is wiggle your mouse around and look towards the bottom center of your screen. You should see a raise hand button. Go ahead and click on that now for us, please. Alternatively, if you've connected in via telephone, you can press *9.
Thank you very much, tech team. I see one hand raised. So if anybody else wants to speak, just use the Zoom raise hand function. Tech team, if you could bring up Amanda Shepard, that would be great. And Amanda, once you come up, just unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood, and go right ahead.
Hi, everybody. Amanda Shepard, Hidden Forest Court. And like a bad penny, I'm back from last month, sort of with the same issues. In my community, there are some boarding houses. And in some ways, Kevin Roman was great. He told me that 5 people can legally rent a home and it's fine, but that's causing us a parking problem. And he sent me a map, and in our community, there's 90 rentals that the city has given, license to, and first world problems, right? There's no parking, and then some of them are flop houses where people are ODing, like the one I'm thinking about. So I'm just here to see if you can give me any more advice on how to deal with that issue, and also repaving on our street. Brian was good and told me that our street was going to be paved within 1 or 2 years, but it looks bad now. So maybe we can make it a priority. That's it. That's all I got.
Thank you very much, Amanda. So I think, Tanisha, maybe you and I can follow up with Amanda, maybe schedule some sort of follow up with her. What do you think?
I'd be happy to do so, Amanda, if you would like to send an email to myself or to Mayor Ashman, and we can get that scheduled.
Perfect. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak tonight? I didn't see any other hands up thus far. Okay, Going once, going, okay. Then we will move on to our public hearing, and let me just pull up. Sorry, excuse me for just a sec. I got to pull up and see who we're calling up here. Oh, this is Kevin Roman. Speaking of Kevin Roman, tech team, if you could bring up Kevin, we're going to talk about our public hearing. We're going to have our public hearing. We're going to conduct it on our prohibited rent increases during the state of emergency. And we have Tom Lonergan as well. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we are here to conduct the public hearing on the proposed emergency ordinance to amend Chapter 13 of the City Code entitled Landlord-Tenant Relations by amending Section 1313A entitled Prohibited Rent Increases During the COVID-19 State of Emergency. The purpose of the emergency ordinance is to extend tenant protections as we continue to recover from the economic and health impacts of the pandemic. The proposed ordinance would extend the tenant protections within the current emergency ordinance that the mayor and council enacted previously back in July of 2020. The current ordinance provided protections from residential rent increases during and for 90 days after the state of emergency declared by Governor Hogan. If not extended, the current ordinance sunsets on January 15th and would have no further force or effect. Therefore, the draft emergency ordinance that was introduced on December 6th, 2021, that is before you tonight, provides the following. It extends the previous protections against rent increases above the Montgomery County Voluntary Rent Guideline until May 15th of 2022. It also prohibits landlords from issuing a notice of an increase above Montgomery County's Voluntary Rent Guideline if that increase would take effect prior to May 15th of 2022. It would also require landlords that may have issued a notice of a rent increase above the Voluntary Rent Guideline to rescind such a notice if that increase would take effect prior to May 15th of 2022. The emergency ordinance would expire and have no further force or effect after May 15th of 2022. A legal notice of tonight's public hearing was published on the city's website on Tuesday, December 7th. Additionally, an email advising of the public hearing was sent to all licensed landlords, including multifamily and single-family properties. We also posted the information on our neighborhood services webpage for our other residents. In the way of public comments, we received a total of 12 written submissions, 11 from landlords and 1 from a tenant advocacy group. To summarize, the landlord submissions mostly mentioned concerns of rising costs for the landlords, such as staffing costs, property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance and utility costs, and for those private landlords, increased homeowners association fees. Landlords also noted the impact the pandemic has had on the tenants and the importance of working with those tenants to keep them in their homes. But ultimately, it was expressed that landlords should be able to provide reasonable rent increases to keep up with the rising operation costs due to inflation. Additionally, one submission asked that we also consider adding a prohibition on late fees to our ordinance, which we understand as any additional cost could be a burden. That said, our thought on late fees is that it is an important tool for landlords to use to ensure timely rent payments from tenants that have the resources to pay on time. If you don't have that mechanism in place, it provides potential for some residents or for some rent payments to be deferred unnecessarily. Throughout the pandemic, most of our landlords have worked with tenants in need and agreed to payment plans and would waive late fees voluntarily. Also, the state code already controls on when and how much a late fee can be assessed. That being a late fee cannot be issued until 10 days after the rent due date, and the fees can't be more than 5% of the rent that is actually due. Also, and probably most importantly, through the COVID rent relief program, If landlords are awarded funds, they must agree to waive all late fees, penalties, and legal fees incurred by the tenant. So for these reasons, we did not include the prohibition on late fees in the proposed ordinance before you tonight. Again, the purpose of the ordinance in its current draft is to provide a level of temporary protection to residential tenants by limiting rent increases while we continue to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. It is an emergency ordinance, therefore, following the public hearing, council will need to make a motion to close the record, and staff is requesting that final action be taken later tonight. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. So we will first do public hearing. If anybody has any questions of staff about this, then let's go through that now, and then we'll go to the public, and then we can come back, close the record, and go through policy discussion. So any questions? Neil Harris.
Just a quick question for Kevin and company. Since the last time we had this discussion, how many incidents have we had of tenants complaining about unfair or illegal rent increases by the landlords?
We've just had a few inquiries from actually the landlords because they were under the impression that the county's law actually applied in the city of Gaithersburg. We have not received any complaints from tenants about rental increases from the last meeting.
Okay, any other questions? We'll go to Rob Wu, and then Ryan after that.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Kevin, for teeing this up. Question on the voluntary rent guidance and the number that's generated by the county of 1.4%. What's the basis for that? And the reason I'm asking is particularly in light of, at least, if you look at the news, you're seeing inflation spiraling out of control and the consumer price index. And again, I don't know the numbers on that, but I want to know, is there any relationship between that 1.4% and inflation?
Yes, that number is pulled from the consumer price index on the residential rent component of the consumer price index for our region. And that's how the county executive comes up with that number.
Okay, and so does that rent, is that rent the inflation or rent increases averaging, or is it also including components of rent that would boil into a landlord's cost, like insurance, mortgages, things like that?
I think it has to do, with the overall inflation. I don't know the exact formula that they use, unfortunately. I can tell you that when the pandemic initially began, it was 2.6%, and then it went down to 1.4%. With inflation increasing and the price of food and other goods increasing, the voluntary rent guideline will be reevaluated in February, and I anticipate it increasing.
Okay, so there is the possibility, if this ordinance were passed today and there was upward pressure on the number in the voluntary rent guidance, that in February there would be the opportunity for a higher amount.
That's correct.
Okay.
Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Kevin, for your work on this. One of the letters we received into the public record, I believe, mentioned ways in which either the county or other levels of government might be trying to provide assistance or subsidy to struggling landlords who have increased costs, whether it's through some sort of direct grant program or whatever. I'm wondering if you could just kind of talk a little bit about what your understanding is of county or state or federal programs that exist now, to what extent our landlords in the city, at least anecdotally, know about them and are trying to take advantage of them, or your staff is trying to kind of direct them to those resources, or maybe there just hasn't been discussion of that. And I guess this letter was sort of suggesting maybe the city ought to consider doing something beyond what it's already doing, but I don't know, given the scale and given our resources, whether that's something that's doable. I know that's kind of separate from the question before us tonight on whether or not to actually approve the resolution, but or the ordinance rather, but I think it goes hand in hand with it and helping to understand what the situation is and help us make our decision. So I'm wondering if you could sort of speak to, you know, what the city might be doing, what additional things we might consider doing. And that might not just be directed to you, it might be for Tanisha or for Tom as well, just to kind of give us some thoughts on that from the staff perspective.
Sure. The biggest resource is the county's rental relief program, which it's two-part. The tenant has to apply and qualify for the rent relief, and then the landlord has to apply as well before and verify that the tenant owes those monies. So that's the biggest source of resource for the tenants and the landlords to date. The city does have some additional funds that is issued through community services. There's a little pot of money there, but yes, in the big picture, we bigger than tonight, I think we need to look at what resources may be available for those landlords and tenants to help everyone recover from the economic impact of the pandemic. And I don't know if Tom would like to comment any further.
No, I think you covered it,
Okay.
Ryan. The city and the county have been working very closely together since the beginning. The city has been there most recently to provide further support to the county, but applicants are first directed to the county funds and programs, and we have been there for supplemental support for some.
I see that Tawana's hand is raised. I'm wondering if she's going to mention that the county's program has concluded, at least for the moment, as of December 31st, and then they'll evaluate if and when they'll do another round. What Tom mentioned is sort of this layering effect where the source of funds for the county's program and the city's program are the same. And there's some federal restrictions in how we can layer or coordinate those funds. And so we, of course, wanted our residents and landlords to benefit from the county's very large share of rental relief. And then, as Kevin mentioned, we have a small pot ourselves that we can use, and there are obviously maybe other resources that we'll certainly look into. I think I must have answered Tawana's question or made her comment because her hand went down.
Thank you, Tanisha. I saw Jim's hand go up, and then we'll go back to Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Kevin, for the presentation. And I want to follow up a little bit on what Ryan was discussing and the idea of the resources that are available for the landlords, specifically if they're unable to increase rent to a level that they feel can cover their expenses. And then pointing the tenants to the rental relief. It's kind of like, if the tenants want to set a number up here, then the residents can ask for help to meet that. If we're keeping the number that the landlords can get to here, even if the tenants are applying for relief, it may not necessarily be reaching that number that landlords feel like fulfill their needs to be able to at least break even. Can you address a little bit about that and what maybe the options might be there?
Yeah, well, the rental relief funds are just to catch up the tenants with any rent that is past due and owed to the landlord. There are certain restrictions on the landlord, as I mentioned. They have to waive all the late fees. They have to agree not to initiate any eviction proceedings against the tenant for a certain limited amount of time. The other resources that the landlord may need to, for operational costs, I think it differs between single family and the multifamily. Most of our multifamily is in better shape than some of the single families. obviously, but so it's really hard to tell with the information that I have right now. I'm sorry, I probably don't have a exact answer for you.
Totally understand. Thank you. And the other question I have is the original ordinance was tied to the emergency declaration. Obviously, the new language is more of a fixed date. And I realize we don't have an emergency declaration at the moment. Do you have any understanding of what the county's plans might be going forward? Obviously, this is our moving forward is an attempt to match what the county is doing. I just want to make sure that we don't end up in a kicking the can situation.
Right. I don't have my crystal ball out, and I don't know which direction that the Montgomery County is going to go in. Our ordinance does, the intent was to mirror what the county had passed. The two major differences, as one that I mentioned earlier, was that we did not include late fees, the waiving of late fees, and the other is that our ordinance would sunset immediately at May 15th, 2022, where the county's was going to sunset May 15th, 2023. So they are apparently leaving the window open.
Thank you.
Okay, Rob, did you have another question?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And I just recalled some mechanics questions that I wanted to ask, and I apologize, Kevin, if I'm going to get too far in the weeds, but I just kind of want to understand how this operates. So if you have a multi-year lease signed that has tiered increases already baked into them, say, it was signed in 19 and there's a 3% rent increase, 19, 20, 20, 21, 21, 22. Does this ordinance then prohibit those increases that occurred, I guess, after we passed the ordinance in 20 and then into 21, even if it's in the lease itself?
Yes, that's my understanding, that would control the rent increase.
Okay. And then what about if you have single year leases and you want to re-up your lease? So you have a $1,000 lease per month, and then it's up and the landlord comes to you and says, do you want to re-up? Does it impact that? Can the landlord not increase the rent above the voluntary rent guidelines at that point?
It depends on if this ordinance passes.
Yeah,
correct. Yeah, the landlord would have to provide 60 days notice of the rent increase, but that rent increase could not take effect after May 15th of 2022.
Okay, even if it's a new leasing document.
Correct. What we have seen and heard from the county is that some landlords are going to initially, if the lease does expire during this period, they're going to a month-to-month, signing a month-to-month with no increase. And then after May 15th, they may be looking into a long-term lease with an additional increase.
Okay. I had seen something at the state level about when a lease expires that a landlord can't not agree to a new lease unless he has cause to do so. I saw some legislation that they wanted to pass there.
Just cause eviction. Yeah.
Well, it's not an eviction. So say your lease term is expired, and the landlord, can the landlord just say, I'm not going to sign a new lease, go move out?
That's correct. They would have to give notice. They could end the lease for any reason at this point.
Okay. And then, so is there any reason why a landlord couldn't say, I can't increase your rent, but I can charge that guy double the rent. I'm going to let you go and I'm going to let that guy in.
Yep. That's what we've heard, not just regionally, but nationally. That's what's happening is some landlords are recovering some of those costs by not renewing leases.
Okay, so, but here in Montgomery County and Gaithersburg in particular, are there any laws that would prohibit a landlord who is prohibited from increasing the rent on a current tenant, that leasehold expires, him just saying, go move out, I've got somebody here who can pay a higher rent?
Not sure about Montgomery County. I do know that they have a provision where they again, I don't want to comment on Montgomery County's code, but in the city of Gaithersburg, no, the landlord could give the 60 days notice that is required, and the tenant would have to move out
Okay.
if,
All right.
if the landlord did not want to renew the lease.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mr.
Mhm.
Mayor.
Okay, any other questions? Lisa, I want to give you a chance if you want to ask a question, otherwise we're going to go to the public.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Thank you, Kevin, for this information. My question is related to the February potential increase because of inflation. How do you see that playing out if this is enacted with the increase potentially in cost to the landlords and the rent increase set into or beyond May? What's the fallout for both the tenant and the landlord? I don't want to. I'm trying to be careful how I word this. Who stands at the most risk if there is a CPI increase in February, but that is already set? Historically, do we know that the impact is insignificant to the landlords in terms of cost of goods and services?
Well, and that's why we have the voluntary rent guideline. It's there to offer a recommendation to landlords at a reasonable rent increase for that particular year, to make sure that the cost of the rental property is keeping up with the cost of the inflation. I think the limited rent, a limited reasonable rent increase, it protects both the tenant and the landlord. We have not seen or heard from complaints from tenants about any of the increases recently. They have been 1.4% for a certain period of time, and then 2.6 before. And we just haven't heard of the concerns. Obviously, some of the landlords in the public comments, they said they haven't raised the rent in 3 years, and they don't plan on raising the rent because they're comfortable with what their rate is set at. So there's a lot of open-endedness on how each landlord will act, and there's a lot of different personalities out there, and everyone does everything a little bit different. Now, once this expires, if tenants do receive an excessive increase, they could always come to staff and say that they want staff to take a look at it. And then if we couldn't mediate a reasonable increase, we could also go to our landlord tenant commission, which would have authority to look at it and determine if that increase was excessive.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Rob Booth.
Sorry, that just generated another question there, so I apologize. If the landlord tenant commission looks at a rent increase and determines it's excessive, what are its authorities?
Well, I think they would determine, what a reasonable rent increase would be.
And could they,
or should be.
Could they then bind the leaseholder and the landlord and the tenant to that amount?
I would believe so. I haven't come across that in my position here, but
Is that a Lynn question?
I'm not sure, but that's something that we have on our code where they would be able to review an excessive rent increase.
The landlord tenant commission would have the authority to enter into an order, which is enforceable by circuit court. It's also appealable to the circuit court as well.
Okay, and that order would be binding upon the lease itself, and
correct.
So they could, the commission could say, this rent increase is excessive. We think it should be 2%, and that would be binding.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin, this is not to put you on the spot. I'm asking for a ballpark estimate here. How how many different landlord entities do you think do business in the city of Gaithersburg?
Well, with the multifamilies, we have 56 multifamily complexes, and we have about 3,000 single-family landlords.
Okay, so somewhere just north of 3,000 independent
3,000, correct.
entities that are landlords in the city.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, at this point, I'm gonna go to the public, and same mechanism as before. If you'd like to speak, use the Zoom raise hand function, and same rules as before. State your name and address or neighborhood, and keep your comments no more than 3 minutes. If you have more than 3 minutes worth of material, hopefully we've gotten it, because we're going to be taking action on this thing tonight. But I think you can get your point across in 3 minutes, and we look forward to it. So tech team, if you could bring up Rob Bindeman, please. Rob, unmute yourself, state your name, address, and go right ahead.
Hey, Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the new members. Mr. Mayor, I like your Quince Orchard hat in the background. A lot of intelligent conversation here. The core of what I want to say as the owner of Montgomery House and Montgomery Park Apartments is that this is no longer an emergency. It's just our reality. And the systems are in place so that there are protections for renters. Market rate increases are the protections for property owners. At Montgomery House and Montgomery Park, when people got sent home, they came home to us, and we were expected to maintain a level of cleanliness, and we did it. We distributed PPE for free. We ordered toilet paper and cleaning supplies, had pizza nights, community food giveaways. Not everybody paid their rent. Some left owing a lot, and going to court wasn't an option for us. These past 20 months have been more difficult than in my 20 years experience before. Revenues are down, costs are up. But despite our efforts and sacrifice, only our industry has been forced to incur mandated business losses. On every front, we're met with inflation, employee salaries, waste collection, new appliances, and basic supplies, all of which lend to the quality of life for our residents and the standards enforced by the city. So we do it. Yet nearly 2 years after the onset of COVID, the city is prohibiting rent increases above 1.4% because of the emergency. Mayor, council members, how is it still an emergency after 2 years? The city and the county have been effective at creating safety nets. There was already emergency assistance. The city and county distributed the vast majority of the federal funds allocated. Their utility assistance programs, all of which just bring us back to even. It doesn't allow us to soak in that inflation. The rash of evictions predicted simply hasn't happened. The system's worked. The average monthly rent in Montgomery Park and Montgomery House is $1,100. So a 5% increase after 2+ years of a rent freeze is only $50 a month. Real money for a budget, granted, but it's not dramatic. But for property owners, it's about scale. Why should residents continue to pay the same amount when the cost of providing the housing continues to increase? Saying yes to housing providers isn't easy, but this is how you protect affordable and middle housing. This is how properties sustain themselves, by having the income to reinvest in the buildings and grounds. Every landlord knows that the worst apartment we have is either vacant or not paying. We aren't going to squeeze our residents disproportionately. Kevin won't let us. What we want to do is not incur government mandated losses. Rent increases are reasonable. Penalizing property owners who've been frontline heroes of the pandemic is not. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rob.
You got it.
Appreciate it. Do we have anybody else who'd like to speak on this topic? I see Jamil Hernandez. Tech team, if you can bring up Jamil, and Jamil, you know the rules. Go right ahead.
Hey, everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go right ahead.
Excellent. Hey, just a quick question, hopefully for folks to consider. If a landlord suffers a structural operating cost increase of 20, 30%, will the ordinance or the mechanism provide a mechanism for submitting for a waiver or other type of dispensation, or will they have to basically eat that during the period? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other speakers this evening on this topic? Going once, going twice. Okay. Kevin Roman, do you want to address Jamil's question there?
Yeah, as the current ordinance is written, there is not a waiver for the landlords. And then again, it's what we have before us tonight just runs until May 15th of 2022.
Okay, thank you for that. So Lynn, next thing we need to do before we do policy discussions, we need to close the record.
Correct.
Okay, so what is the pleasure of the council? Shall we entertain a motion to close the record? Rob Wu.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Do we have a second? Jim McNulty.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, say nay. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Aye.
And Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. 5-0. The record is closed on this. And I'll start policy discussion just sort of reiterating my distaste for this sort of with the caveat, the important caveat that I 100% believe that this is well intentioned. I just feel like when you get involved in trying to legislate, get in between adult actors in their in contracts that they make, there are unintended consequences, and I think we started to hear a little bit about that this evening in cases where in other places, given rent increase limitations legislated by governments, now it is causing landlords to look differently upon who they will rent to, and that's in a community as diverse as ours in every way. That's a consequence we should be aware of. I also think I take Rob Benjamin's point well that landlords have been hit by the pandemic just as well as renters have, and they have in many cases given forbearance and been generous to their renters. Perhaps there are bad actors out there. Again, we have Kevin Roman and his team. We have Landlord Tenant Affairs, and then getting to the fact to further underscore this point. There may be, and it's a question Rob asked and Lisa, like who's going to get the worst of this deal? I think it's a very legitimate question. When you talk about 3,000 plus different entities, some of them may operate on wide margins and they may be making a killing here and they can afford it, they can take it. And some may be on very narrow margins. And we don't have the capacity or the time to sort all that out. So we can be doing, there is a possibility of these unintended consequences. And that's what gives me a lot of pause about something like this. So what it's mitigated to me, and I said this before when we talked about it, that we're only talking till May 15th. So essentially it's 5 months. It's not the worst thing in the world, but if I was voting on this, and obviously I'm not, I would vote against it. So that's where I am. And that said, we all are on the same boat. We don't want anybody losing housing. We want fair deals. We want to foster an environment where fair dealing is made between landlords and tenants, and all is happy in the world, and people can of all different budgets have a place to live in Gaithersburg. We're all there. It's how we get there, and I'm not sure that this would be a positive step in getting us there. So that's where I am. Who'd like to speak next? Or if not, who'd like to make a motion? I don't see a lot of hands going up here. Lisa Henderson. And then we'll go to Ryan.
It is a great concern to me of what I will call the switch. So if a landlord has a tenant whose lease is about to expire, and there's a richer person down the road who, God forbid, looks different and speaks different, who will come into that place because they're willing to pay more rent to circumvent this restriction, it causes me great pause to know that is a behavior or an act that can occur with no ramifications of it being wrong or illegal. Maybe morally wrong, but legally they're in their rights to do it. It causes me great concern.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll go to Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo that concern, and I think that the thoughtful discussion that we've been having tonight and in previous meetings and sessions about this issue, does reflect that our council in general is trying to do the morally right thing here in the midst of an emergency from a socioeconomic perspective, to really consider those in need, both those who are in need as renters and, despite what stereotypes might exist about all landlords, those who are property owners who are struggling with their own business situation in the midst of this difficult economy and this pandemic. There is a part of me that says, look, as unseemly as it may feel that a landlord has the right to kind of terminate their arrangement with a tenant in order to replace them with another tenant who can pay more, there's also an important thread of supply and demand and, the sort of free market capitalistic economy that we cannot, completely undermine just because it's inconvenient to us. I mean, it's a fundamental thread of the way our society works as well. But having said that, and having expressed, similar reservations to what the mayor articulated earlier, I also think in these extenuating circumstances that it's important for us to take action on a temporary basis. And I do think it's important that it be temporary and that we not use this as an excuse to continue extending and extending and extending. But we are still in the midst of a lot of this in terms of the economic fallout and the public health fallout. And I think it's a little too early to be pulling back on the arrangement to try to assist people in the short term temporarily. I also think it's important for us to remember that the deadlines that we're talking about, the specific dates that are sort of driving this draft ordinance, are driven a lot by a need to parallel our efforts somewhat with what the county is doing. We don't always have to do things the same way as the county, and often we don't. But for certain things, it makes sense to create that sort of parity so that landlords and tenants are operating on a relatively level playing field regionally with what makes the most sense to try and protect people in the short term in an emergency. So it's frustrating that, neither answer to the question of how to vote on this is really a perfect answer, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I am going to be voting for this ordinance, acknowledging that it is less than perfect and acknowledging that there are real problems here and that we need to continue to consider ways to support not only tenants, but also landlords going forward. And that I think we need to implement this short-term measure in conjunction with a doubling down on our efforts to do outreach to connect those in need in the community, including small landlords, with assistance and services that we are aware of, whether it's at the county level, the federal level, or even supplemental at the city level, to do our part in that outreach effort in conjunction with implementing this ordinance. So that's where I am.
Thank you, Ryan. Who'd like to go next? We'll go to Jim and then Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am struggling with this one. I'm going to be completely honest. I agree with Ryan in that I think whichever way we vote, I don't know if we're all going to feel like woohoo about it, because we talked a lot about in the campaign that a lot of this job is managing competing interests, and this is very much that reality. Mr. Bindeman's testimony really struck a chord with me. I don't love the idea of the city of Gaithersburg being in the rent control business. I recognize the stresses being put on landlords of all sizes. Obviously, the larger ones have usually have more resources to be able to absorb some of that. But we are asking a lot of our landlords, and we've been asking a lot of our people. Particularly, first responders and frontline medical workers and essential personnel that never knew they were essential until we, required them to go to work because we needed them to in the middle of a pandemic. My concern, if we don't pass this, is, the difference for a struggling family of even as little as $50 could be the difference between whether they choose to pay their rent or buy food or get their medicine. Or it may cause somebody who is feeling like they have COVID to not get tested or not report it because they can't afford to not go to work. These are the things that I'm struggling with. It's good to know that there are recourses for people, if we didn't pass this, to go to. But I think it also is telling that the only people primarily that we heard from on this is on the landlord side, because very likely the people that are on the tenant side don't have the ability or the bandwidth to pay attention. We talk about this all the time. Are the people who need it the most the ones who can't participate in the process? And are we not hearing from them because they just can't? So I want to make sure that we're being that voice. I am on the fence. I've been scribbling notes furiously, listening to everybody's testimony. I was, Lisa and I were elected 2 months ago today, and this is I think the first real challenge for us to really hear the issues and make a decision. And I agree. I am glad to hear the really thoughtful consideration here. And I want to hear more before I make my vote, because there are very positive and very strong arguments in both directions.
Thank you, Jim. We'll go to Rob.
Thanks, Mayor. I kind of echo what Jim just said regarding kind of the deliberation that I think needs to occur here. And I think that is occurring here. I'm on the fence as well. I want to help, and I want to help those that are in a situation, as Jim just mentioned, where perhaps it is the straw that breaks the camel's back if you get this rent increase. And that's kind of the situation that this ordinance is really geared towards in a meaningful way. You can judge from the questions that I was asking about other situations that could occur, the kind of the unintended consequences that could occur by limiting rent increases, as well as, what mechanisms there are out there. I mean, the most severe thing that could happen to a renter is that they are evicted. They are let go from their housing. They're not able to make their rent, and they're on the street. But I don't think that this addresses that situation. And I think we need to double down, and I'm sure we are, on our efforts to address those situations. And then on the flip side of it is, those of us who have been fortunate during the pandemic, who could and should be in a position to absorb a rent increase if we were in a rental situation. And I used to be a renter before I bought here in Gaithersburg, so I understand the situation. And so I hear what's being said from the landlords, that, you know, they're in a situation where they've got bills to pay. And, you know, if you are in a situation where you have bills to pay, but you can't recoup those, you're kind of being sandwiched and you're eating the costs. And is it fair to the landlords who are in that situation where they do have tenants that are of means to be able to take on that rent increase and therefore provide additional income to the landlords, who then I think theoretically would be in a position to better address those specific situations where there are tenants that you know, the straw is breaking the camel's back, and we should work with them in that regard. And so I would propose an amendment to the ordinance to narrow it, to tailor it. So I think we can propose that amendment today without having to re-notify. That would focus the impact, kind of the tool here, on the situations that it's really meant to address, that which is those who are in the situation where the straw will break the camel's back. And I was kind of heartened by the conversation. I had not realized the authority of the Landlord Tenant Commission. And so thank you to Kevin and to Lynn for kind of clarifying what their authority is. And so the language that I'm going to propose is going to limit the cap on the rent increase to those situations that I just discussed, and allow for rent increases for those that can, you know, be able to absorb the costs, tenants that can absorb the cost because of their financial situations. And the tool for doing that, I think, is the Landlord Tenant Commission. So the proposal for the amendment the amendment I propose is to Section A, keeping the text as is, after May 15th, 2022, add a comma. And the language that I'm going to propose be read in is, if the tenant makes a reasonable showing that any excessive rent increase would cause hardship due to impacts related to COVID-19. And the thought there is that rent increases could generally be provided for within the city. And those would be under the landlord tenant laws. They would be controlled by that excessive rent increase that we had discussed before. So anybody can go to Landlord Tenant Commission and say, this is excessive, and Landlord Tenant Commission could then adjudicate it. What this language would do is kind of add more meat to the bones for the Landlord Tenant Commission to adjudicate rents increases in the situation where there's an impact, financial impact due to COVID. And so the Landlord Tenant Commission would then be in the position to, if they receive a complaint where a person makes, or tenant makes any showing of financial impact, their ability to pay, the Landlord Tenant Commission would then be able to rely on this to say, well, you can't increase the rent above 1.5%, or whatever the voluntary guidelines are starting in February. And that, I guess, as Lynn would say, that order would be binding, subject to appeal to the circuit court. With that, I think that I would strike paragraph B, because there would be no sense to a notice provision that you can't increase the rent if we're allowing a general increase to rent to those that are able to pay comfortably. I would also strike paragraph C and keep paragraph D.
Rob, can you repeat your proposed language?
Sure. So paragraph A, complete the language that is there without, not the language that is struck through.
Sure.
So prior to May 15th, 2022, the proposed language is changing that period to a comma. If the tenant makes a reasonable showing that any excessive rent increase would cause hardship due to impacts related to COVID-19. And so if they show that the excessive rent increase it causes them a hardship, then it's limited to the 1.5%. And the Landlord Tenant Commission would be able to enforce that. And
Rob.
that's the gist, but okay.
Cool, we got it. I saw Ryan's hand go up. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate what Councilmember Wu is trying to do here. I guess my concern is that, as I understand the proposed amendment, what it does is sort of place the burden on the tenant and create a potential another several layers of administrative burden that will ultimately be not only on the tenant, but also on the landlord to respond to the tenant and have some kind of proceeding in front of the commission. In terms of, trying to resolve the tensions in our sort of philosophical concerns, I understand what Councilmember Wu was trying to do, but if this ordinance is to be temporary and, is to expire in May of 2022, essentially, then it seems to me that sort of the juice isn't worth the squeeze in creating a separate process between now and then for parties to have to go through, particularly when considering Councilmember McNulty's point that, there's sort of this imbalance of resources and notice when we have these kinds of public discussions. I mean, I don't know how many folks sort of tune into the fact that when our neighborhood services division has some kind of proposal that it's working on in front of the mayor and council, or even some sort of staff level proposal, and it emails out a notice to a pre-established email distribution list of all the landlords in the city, because we have one of those. It doesn't have a corresponding email list for all the tenants in the city, or even tenant associations in the city. Maybe, there's one large countywide tenants association that I'm aware of that may, that Kevin and his staff may reach out to when they have these issues. But it's certainly no fault of staff, but there is sort of just a systemic imbalance in terms of who gets notified of these types of public hearings and discussions. And so that was a point that Jim made very well. And I think it kind of comes into play here too, for the same reasons, to place the burden on a tenant to have to go through the hoops of establishing that they can't pay between now and May, just doesn't seem worth it, if this is going to really expire in May anyway. And it doesn't seem entirely fair given all of the, structural imbalances and burdens that already exist on tenants. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Rob, before we go back to you, I want to give Neil a chance to speak because he hasn't spoken yet. So then you can defend your amendment after that. Go ahead, Neil.
All right. I like to let other people have a chance to speak so that I don't duplicate what's been said already. So first of all, regarding Rob's amendment, I think it just overcomplicates the situation, and I'd be concerned about making a situation more complicated and requiring. I mean, I just like the rules to be straightforward so people know what's going on. So first of all, the 1.4% increase set by the county was set at a time when inflation was dropping dramatically due to the onset of the COVID pandemic, shutting down businesses, and price pressure was pushing downward rather than upward. It's quite different today. Inflation is running closer to 6%, and in some sectors higher than that. Utility prices are going up, and increases have been approved at much higher numbers. So I'm very sympathetic to what we heard from the landlord, both here at the meeting tonight and by email from Mr. Bindeman and from the various other landlords. I'm also struck by the fact that we haven't been hearing complaints from tenants regarding increases, because I think that there is, a supply and demand issue in the rental marketplace that is making it less likely that this goes on. So, and I'm also very concerned about the concept of rent control. It's something that, having taken advanced business and economics classes, is something that generally is not something that is recommended if you want to have a healthy economy. So at this point, I think I reluctantly voted for this measure last time when we were in the throes of the emergency, but I think at this point I'd be less inclined to move forward, especially at the 1.4% mark, which was which is probably due for a revision, a dramatic revision, but until that is revised, that is probably the last straw for me in this concept. Is 1.4% is just not reasonable. It's putting a big burden on landlords at a time when it's not being shared by it's being imposed upon them by a government organization that's not sharing in the burden or not trying to do something to ameliorate it.
Thank you, Neil. We'll go to Rob.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I think, if we wanted to have a notice provision, I don't know if there already is. Kevin can chime in on that. With a proposed rent increase, does the landlord have to notify the tenant that they have the right to appeal the rent increase to the Landlord Tenant Commission that has a binding impact on the rent increase?
Rob, the other thing that maybe you could speak to is how difficult it would be, particularly on our limited staff, to sort of litigate or interpret related to COVID, the words related to COVID. It just seems like that's really subject to a lot of different interpretations.
I purposely drafted that very broadly and the standard of proof for the tenant to be very minimal, so that the Landlord Tenant Commission in their discretion could make the call, just as if they were making a call as to whether a rent increase was excessive. We would just be providing more meat and more direction to them that if the tenant's inability to manage the rent increase is caused in any way due to financial impact of COVID, then they are too limited to the 1.4%. Otherwise, as an independent tribunal, they could say, well, okay, 10% is excessive, but 9% is not. And so we're providing guidance to the Landlord Tenant Commission through an ordinance that in this specific situation, this is what is reasonable and you shall apply it. But the burden of proof, the standard of proof, my intent is to essentially have a prima facie showing by the tenant, and the Landlord Tenant Commission would then have the ability to weigh that evidence. I mean, my hope is that, as Kevin was discussing before, that we aren't hearing many complaints, and maybe that relates to the fact that the markets don't command rent increases right now, in which case the ordinance is superfluous because there are no rent increases above 1.4%. But to the extent that there are, or there's the possibility that there would be in the next 6 months, my thought is to provide that cap in a targeted fashion, rather than a cap that's across the board, even for people that could pay the rents and be able to take the rent increase on comfortably.
Okay. All right. So maybe the best way to proceed here is someone make the motion for the ordinance as written, and then Rob, you can make a motion to amend and see if that gets support. So Ryan, you seemed like you were. Why don't you make the motion?
I will move approval of the emergency ordinance as written and presented to us by staff.
Okay, do we have a second? Jim.
I'll second.
Okay, all right. Now, Rob, do you want to make your motion to amend as you had described earlier?
Lynn question, should he call the roll on the amendment as initially presented, or should I? Is that the correct way to go?
You would need to make a motion to amend, and then we would need to see if there were, excuse me, enough votes to approve the amendment.
Okay, I make a motion to amend.
You could just say as you outlined before, as you specifically wrote before.
As I specifically wrote before.
Or said before.
As I said before, also additionally, if staff wants to add, if there's already not a notice provision to tenants, that this is there, and in the case of a rent increase, is that something I would need to draft language for right now, or is that something that, comes across?
There is a
ahead,
requirement. There is a requirement for the landlord to provide notice to the tenant of the rent increase.
What about the right to appeal to the Landlord Tenant Commission? And in this case, a specific right to appeal in the case of a COVID impact?
We would have to add that, I believe, if that's correct, Lynn.
Yes, and that would be an amendment to a different section of the ordinance, so that would not be something we could consider this evening. Because we've
So
not
you'd have
introduced.
to do the language without the notice provision. Is that what you're saying, Lynn?
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, we could just add another sentence to A with a notice provision, something like provided that the landlord shall provide notice to. I'm just wondering, do I need to spell that out, or is that something that if the intent comes across and is affirmed by the council, that staff has leeway to draft it?
And since the council is taking final action on the ordinance this evening, we would need the exact language of the amendment.
So Rob, did you need to amend? Did your amendment, did you?
Okay, so I'll just, let me start over here. So I move to amend the ordinance, section 13-13A, as follows. Paragraph A, the written language remains as is, the strike-through language remains as is. After May 15th, 2022, strike period, add a comma, add the following language. If the tenant makes a reasonable showing that any excessive rent increase would cause hardship due to impacts related to COVID-19, period. Space, or one space, depending on whether you do two spaces or not after sentences. Further, provided that the landlord shall provide notice of this provision to the tenant in the case of a proposed rent increase, period.
Lynn, are you
Did that
following
make
that? You good? Okay. All right. Do we have a second on this amendment? Any second? If not, then the motion is going to, then we don't have a motion. We don't have a vote. Okay. Keep it going one more time. No seconds. Okay. All right. Well, then we have a motion and a second on the original ordinance as drafted. So I will call the roll on that. And we will go to council. So all in favor say aye, and opposed say nay. Councilmember Wu.
Nay.
Council Vice President Harris.
Nay.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Aye.
Councilmember Henderson.
This is a difficult one. Aye.
Okay. The motion carries 3-2 with Council Vice President Harris and Councilmember Wu voting in dissent. Okay. Thank you all. This was this is a great discussion. I don't necessarily agree with where we ended up, but I really appreciate all the thought that people invested in this, and I 100% believe in everyone's good faith here. So good job. And next on our agenda is from Mayor and City Council, and we're going to start with Council Vice President Harris tonight.
So first of all, I'd like to wish everyone a very happy new year. Hope you had a great holiday season and took some time off and enjoyed yourselves and didn't catch any horrible diseases along the way. I made a New Year's resolution to try to be succinct, so I will stop now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. We will go to Councilmember Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to echo your comments about the discussion on the previous vote and, salute all my colleagues. This was a tough one. And I do sincerely believe everyone was acting in good faith and the best decision-making that they could. It's rare that we have 3-2 votes on the city council, and, just sort of not only to my ongoing colleagues, but also to my new colleagues. I just want to commend everyone. And, some of these are tough calls, and I guess the history will shed some light on, whether we were right or wrong. But I do think it's important that we all understand and acknowledge, and that the public understand and acknowledge the civil and thoughtful way in which we deliberate about these difficult issues, regardless of what the ultimate outcome is. So thanks to my colleagues, and I echo what the mayor said. In terms of just a few quick other comments, I want to echo Happy New Year to everyone. Hope everyone had a safe and happy holiday. I want to thank our intrepid Department of Public Works for the great snow plowing today, and remind everybody to stay safe as the snow melt freezes over again tonight. It's probably going to be more dangerous tonight and tomorrow morning than it was today on the roads. So please do be careful out there. I want to thank all of our staff and volunteers and sponsors and partners who were involved with Winter Lights, another wonderful, successful year. My family really enjoyed going to Winter Lights a couple of times over the season, and just really appreciate having that as a special amenity here in the city that draws a lot of people. Also want to thank everybody who was involved in our holiday giving program, which helps hundreds of families in need during the holidays, and really does an incredible job organizing that. So thanks to them. Just a couple of quick mentions of recent past events and upcoming events in the public interest. First, on December 16th, a number of us from the mayor and city council were on hand for a retirement celebration for Dave Ludington of our Parks, Rec, and Culture Department, to congratulate him on his retirement. He has been a fixture in our rec programs for many years. He will, of course, be missed on staff, but sticking around locally and continues to be involved in rec sports, and we wish him all the best. He's really been a tremendous contributor to our programs and their success. Also on December 16th, after our last regular meeting, we had the virtual annual legislative meeting of the Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Municipal League, where we had the opportunity to engage with a handful of state elected officials virtually on a number of policy priorities. So thanks to everybody from the chapter leadership and to all of the state legislators who participated in that. Normally, obviously, that's an in-person meeting and a good opportunity, among others, for us to interact with our state legislators. And we're optimistic that the annual legislative meeting next December, or I should say this coming December in 2022, will be in person again. And that's a good segue to the fact that on January 12th, the 2022 regular legislative session of the Maryland State General Assembly will open. And depending on COVID safety protocols and what facts on the ground are, maybe some of us from the city leadership will be attending in person in Annapolis to again interact with our state legislators and advocate for our own priorities. Among other hot button issues that are going to be in front of the State General Assembly over the next couple of months include the final approval of state legislative district maps in the wake of the 2020 census, which might include some changes to the legislative district in which Gaithersburg sits, although we anticipate there'll be relatively minor changes, if any. And of course, to continue to advocate our other priorities, like the need to permanently restore highway user revenues, which are the portion of the state gas tax revenue that under law is supposed to be allocated to municipal governments for transportation investment. We think this year might be the year that we finally make sure that the allocations become permanent going forward. We have managed to restore the allocations on a temporary basis for the last few years, but if we don't make them permanent, then they will go away again, which will be a real loss to not only Gaithersburg, but cities and towns around the state. And of course, Gaithersburg has a number of other legislative priorities that we'll be advocating between now and April, when the 2022 session of the General Assembly comes to an end. The mayor issued the proclamation earlier this evening. I just want to remind everybody of Martin Luther King Jr. Day and the tradition to use it as a day of service in our community, whether that service is in person or virtual. There are still many ways to help. And I would encourage folks to look for ways to spend some of the time that day, particularly if you're not working that day and you find yourself with some free time, to give back to the community. It's a great way to honor the memory of Dr. King and to help those in need. And then finally, just as a point of personal privilege, today is my father's 70th birthday. So I just want to wish a very happy 70th birthday to my dad, Dr. Robert Spiegel, and wish him all the best. We love you.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Happy birthday, Dr. Spiegel. We will go to Councilmember McNulty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will extend my happy birthday wishes to Dr. Spiegel as well. I'll start off with an announcement. The mayor and city council are seeking to fill a vacancy on the Board of Appeals for a full member. The board is a quasi-judicial committee that hears and decides special exceptions and authorizes variances from the strict application of the terms or requirements of the city's zoning ordinance. Additionally, the board conducts administrative reviews of any final offer, requirement, decision, or determination made by any administrative official, department of the city government as allowed by the city code, planning commission, or historic district commission. The Board of Appeals consists of 5 members and 1 alternate who are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council for 3-year terms. All applicants must reside within the corporate city limits. Resumes and letters of interest should be submitted by the close of business on Monday, January 24th, 2022, via mail to the mayor and city council, 31 South Summit Avenue, Gaithersburg, Maryland, 20877, or via email to cityhall@gaithersburgmd.gov. For more information, visit the city's website or contact Planner Caroline Seiden at 240-805-1074. I want to echo everybody's comments about wishing everyone a happy new year, and I hope you all had a safe and healthy holiday season. I had the privilege of attending several of the events that Council Member Spiegel attended, and I also want to extend my congratulations to the employee recognition winners, Pete and Julius, Jake, Keegan, Anna, Jocelyn, and Paul. Thank you so much for everything you do for our city. I was fortunate to get my booster shot over the break, as did my 17-year-old daughter. And we now just need to get my 14-year-old boosted. So I encourage everyone who has not had the opportunity, please do what you can for our community, get yourself boosted so that hopefully we can get back to what feels like a more normal than this is. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be entering an endemic stage instead of pandemic. So I think we're just going to have to be learning how to live with this. And but it is my hope that as the weather warms, that we'll be able to get back to no masks and being able to enjoy what is as close to a normal life as we can. And that's it for me tonight.
Thank you, Jim. We'll go to Lisa Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, and Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had a safe and happy holiday, and welcome to 2022. I spent part of my holiday with a good old-fashioned cold, as you may hear. I tended to stay away from people because even though it's just a cold, no one wants you around coughing and sneezing with a mask on. It just doesn't look good. So I will say that, and also to remind folks to, if you're not feeling well, to get tested. Better yet, get vaccinated, and better yet, even get boosted. I was able to get my booster over the holiday. I'm excited about that. It makes me feel like a superhero. I'm super protected. So it is a good thing to do. Over the holiday, one of the highlights for me was I attended saw the Gaithersburg Choir sing at Asbury. And I remembered all the words to 12 Days of Christmas. And they did a round in the audience, and it was a lot of fun. So I really enjoyed attending that event and getting to sing and socialize with others. That was fantastic. I encourage everyone for the week of January 15th, Martin Luther King week, to give of your service, give of your time, give of your efforts. You gotta put some muscle into it. There are lots of opportunities and activities around the city that you can participate in to enjoy others and to give to others who are in need, which will make you feel good. Trust me, it will actually make you feel good. So I wish you everyone a happy year coming up, a happy January, February, and the rest of the month for 2022. I'm excited to be here and excited to serve for the city of Gaithersburg. Thank you all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Lisa. We will go to Rob Wu.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Happy New Year to everyone. Happy birthday to Dr. Spiegel. Lisa, I hope you feel better. Neil, I really appreciate your New Year's resolution. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rob. Brief as always. I will just underscore a couple of things that Ryan said. Number one, I want to publicly congratulate Dave Ludington on his retirement. Several of us were there for a small reception that was held for Dave, and I brought up the story that actually Dave Ludington was the first person that I knew who was city staff. Like, he was the face of the city of Gaithersburg when I came in. My kids were in rec programs, and I stepped up to be a coach of the team. None of the other dads or moms wanted to do it, and Dave Ludington couldn't have been a nicer, more welcoming face and person to represent the city of Gaithersburg. And it's, you just like, when people think about city staff and sort of the more public facing parts of it, they don't necessarily think about, they think about the city manager and maybe the city attorney and the assistant and deputy and city clerk, but they don't necessarily think about the person in charge of youth rec sports. But you know, you should, because those people often, that's the face that people see. And it's wonderful to have had somebody who's so nurturing and welcoming and wonderful as Dave was. And he served us for a couple of decades and had the time of his life. And it really, I'm glad he's going to go on to do things he wants to do, but we're going to miss him for sure. So thanks for bringing that up, Ryan. Also, thanks for bringing up the congratulations that are due to staff for snow removal and the job that they've done over the past, 18 hours or whatever it's been at this point. And as you note, there's certainly going to be more as it freezes overnight. So everyone needs to be careful out there. And last, I just want to note that Tanisha and I had a conversation earlier today. We had initially planned to come back to do in-person meetings sort of at the end of this month. And we're going to, given the tremendous surge right now of Omicron variant, we're going to delay it at least a month and sort of revisit it next month. So we will get back in person, but we're not quite there yet. I will note to the general public that in lieu of a work session next week, the City of Gaithersburg Mayor and Council will participate in a workshop on Monday, January 10th, 6:30 p.m. to receive a transportation overview and updates on city, county, and state projects. In addition, the City Mayor and Council will participate in a workshop on Thursday, January 13th, at 6 p.m. to receive a presentation on financial budget basics. The next regular session of the Mayor and Council will be held on Tuesday, January 18th, 2022, because of not on Monday, because that's the MLK holiday. These sessions are not going to be in person. They will, as I just noted, they will be conducted on Zoom. And if you're interested in submitting comments or being part of the meeting, just go to gaithersburgmd.gov/virtual. And if you have any questions, feel free to send a note to mccservices@gaithersburgmd.gov. With that, I will go on to from the city manager and turn it over to Tanisha.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually don't have much this evening at all. I hope that you all have had a safe and healthy welcome to the new year. It's good to be back. My mom was here in Gaithersburg for 2 weeks and had an opportunity to take in the sights and sounds of my townhouse for 2 weeks because of the surge. We stayed in most of the time, but we made it out to Winter Lights. And as you know, last year was my first experience with Winter Lights, and I felt like a child and was in awe. And she had the exact same reaction. So just another testament to the incredible work that our staff does. We can't thank them enough for their service and all that they do for us. And I'm glad to be starting yet another year with the best team on the planet, which all of you are a part of as well. So that's all I have this evening. And I also want to say happy birthday to Dr. Spiegel.
Well done. Okay, we'll move on to economic development update. Tech team, if you could bring up Tom Lonergan, that would be great.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening.
And Happy New Year to you and everyone. I just got one item for you tonight. While the pandemic does continue to cause upheaval and uncertainty in the commercial real estate market, the city of Gaithersburg is starting 2022 in a relatively good place. Through our subscription to CoStar, Sharon Disk and I track around 8 million square feet of office and what we call flex space here in the city. And current indicators suggest that Gaithersburg has weathered the pandemic's impacts pretty well, at least so far. Currently, our office and industrial vacancy rate stands around 6.6%, down from a pandemic era peak of 7.3% and roughly comparable to pre-pandemic vacancy rates of between 6 and 7%, depending on the month. It also tracks with the broader trend of office tenants' quote unquote flight to quality, with Class A office properties in the city averaging around 4% vacancy rates, while older Class B and C properties hovering closer to 10%. Asking rents are also up considerably at around $28 a square foot, up from $24 a square foot just a year ago. And market sales prices of $268 a square foot are up 3.5% year over year, with the recent sale of 9737 Washingtonian Boulevard, now home to Leidos, for $119 million, topping $400 a square foot. On the retail front, the average vacancy rate citywide is just over 2%, not including Lake Forest Mall, with average market rents of around $32 a foot. That's down slightly year over year, and we do expect to see small but continued declines in those rents over the next several months, followed by a rebound next year. We will continue to monitor those statistics and keep you updated quarterly. That's all I got tonight.
Tom, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to ordinances, resolutions, and regulations. First one is going to be led by Landlord, and I'll just say the next few items are related to applying personnel policies to mayor and council. And this as a reminder, originated from a conversation Ryan and I had probably a year ago at this point, upon seeing an alleged sexual harassment situation in another jurisdiction, and sort of asking ourselves, well, you know, if in that case an elected official had been accused of by several staff members from that jurisdiction of having sexually harassed them, and Ryan and I got to talking, well, what would happen if in Gaithersburg if that happened? What mechanism do we have to hold elected officials accountable? And it turns out there's not much, and so that started a discussion about applying personnel policies to mayor and council. It's more broad than just sexual harassment. It's about various behaviors, but that's the genesis of what we're talking about tonight. So go ahead, Lynn.
Thank you. The first section I want to discuss is an amendment to section 6 of the charter. And this one's a little bit unrelated to personnel policies. This deals really with the scheduling of regular and special meetings by the mayor and council. We did want to provide some flexibility here in order to accommodate potential summer recess or holiday recess that the mayor and council may like to have. It would take out the requirement that the mayor and council meet at least once each month, and this would be for your regular meetings, and does allow those meetings to be set as prescribed by regulations. Again, this is set for introduction this evening, and we would recommend that there be a public hearing on this matter scheduled for February 7th.
Any questions, or would someone like to move to introduce? Neil Harris.
I will move to introduce.
Ryan.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Aye.
And Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. That one is introduced.
And I'm going to discuss the next 4 items kind of jointly, but then we will need separate motions on each. All of these items are intended to address the issue that Mayor Ashman just discussed of developing personnel policies that are applicable to the mayor and council. So the first of those is another charter amendment, which would be an amendment to section 17 of the charter. It would be a new section in the charter. And it would provide for the automatic forfeiture of office or for either the mayor or a council member for 3 specific items. One would be if they were no longer domiciled in the city, if they're required to be removed from office under the provisions of the Maryland Constitution or other applicable state law, or if they miss more than 4 consecutive regular mayor and council meetings without an excuse. And then there are some exceptions kind of defining what an excuse would be. And then the second provision of that charter does allow the mayor and council or the council to adopt personnel regulations governing the conduct of elected officials. I know we discussed this section at work session on October 11th. We did make a couple minor changes to this subsequent to the work session, mostly in subsection 2, which is the removal from office under the provisions of the Maryland Constitution. We wanted to clarify that language to make it abundantly clear, because there was some discussion. We wanted to make sure we weren't redundant with Maryland law, but then also, certainly state that we would have the ability to automatically remove if there were a violation of the Maryland Charter. So the other change we did make to that is the number of consecutive mayor and council meetings that would, if you missed more of them, would require automatic removal. In the original proposal, it was 6. And what's before you this evening is 4, because there was some discussion from the mayor and council that they thought 6 was too many. I do want to caution that this is for introduction. So it may be better to introduce with a larger number, because we can't go with a larger, we can't amend it up through the process. We can only amend it down. So that's, I guess, one note of caution with that section. Are there any questions on that section, or do you want me to move to the city code provisions?
I see some hands up. We'll go to Lisa and then Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. Lynn, you stated 4, more than 4. Is it at least 4, or?
Maybe the language does say more than 4. So you would have to miss 5 consecutive meetings for this to take effect without excuse.
Okay. Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. Lynn, it says automatically removed. So I'm wondering with section 3 that the council can grant an exception. So my question is, does the council need to meet to acknowledge that the member has been removed, or does that section C need to happen prior to the 5th, knowing that it's going to occur?
Yeah, I think the intent there was that the request for the exception would be made before the council member would miss the fifth consecutive meeting,
Okay,
which
and
would
so does
allow
it,
automatic removal.
so at the moment that the council member misses their fifth meeting, is it automatic, is it forfeit and there's no action by the council, or is there a vote that happens to acknowledge that this is indeed taken place?
Yeah, it's intended to be automatic, so there would be no action required by the
Okay.
council.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, I'm sure everyone here is clear on it, but it's not just missing 5 meetings. It's actually 5 consecutive meetings and without a trace, without telling anybody why, or explain that you're going to be absent, just not showing up 5 straight times. To me, I think that number is too large. I would make the number 3, but because I rarely even see it, that someone just plain doesn't show up. Maybe I've seen it once or twice, but it's rare. For it to happen 3 from the same person consecutively, that's a real problem. But we can get to that when we get to the public hearing. As Lynn says, we can reduce the number later. Rob, I saw Neil's hand first, then Rob. Go ahead, Neil. We'll go to Ryan too. Go ahead. Neil, you go ahead.
My question is, where do we define the person being domiciled in Gaithersburg? Do they have to be here 100% of the year? Can they be in Florida for 5 months? I mean, what is the requirement there?
There is a whole body of case law in Maryland that discusses domicile, and there are under Maryland law probably about 20 different criteria that go into determining whether someone is domiciled. So, we did not include our own definition because that would be something that would be controlled under state law.
Okay.
So again, I guess following up on that, is that something that would require some legal action rather than being automatic? Because if it's not expressly clear.
Yeah, there would need to be a legal determination made as to whether someone is domiciled or not domiciled in the state. So that would require some legal action.
Okay, we'll go to Rob and then Ryan.
Thanks, Mayor. And I had a question, but just following up on what Lynn just said, is that if the legal action relating to domicile would mean a legal determination by the city, by you perhaps, and then an automatic provision of removal, and then that could be appealed to circuit court. Is that the intent, or is there an intent that we vote on a domicile that then triggers the ordinance?
I mean, I think that there would be certainly a legal determination, which would most likely come from my office, as to at least what our opinion is as to whether the person continues to be domiciled. But I mean, that is one that would need a vote from the council.
Okay, so it's not then automatic. It would have to be a determination of no domicile. That would
Yeah,
then
I mean, it would be automatic upon that determination.
upon that. Okay.
Ryan.
Well, no, that was my follow-up question. Just wanted to be clear once again that 3A is just a notification. There's no notification and assent, meaning I just had to send an email, or one of us has to send an email to the mayor or to the clerk and say, hey, we're going to miss the meeting. And that's that. It's now an excused absence.
Correct. And then when we get to the regulations, that's spelled out in a little bit more detail in the regulations.
Okay. And so 3C, the intent behind that is, somebody goes on a 3-hour tour, they don't come back prior to the expiration of the fourth, or prior to the initiation of the 5th meeting, then we could make a determination saying, hey, we know they're on a 3-hour tour. We don't know when they're coming back. Let's take a vote to allow them to remain on the council.
Yep. I mean, I think that would be, certainly the example would be in the event of disability.
Okay.
If somebody had a medical issue where you knew they were going to be out for, an extended period of time, but would be coming back.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Ryan.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Just a few of the items that I just wanted to address, especially having been on the subcommittee that worked with Lynn and other staff to kind of try to develop some of the recommendations that went into this draft. First of all, I understand Neil's question about domicile. For those of us, who are lawyers, we may have dealt extensively with this issue. It's a legal term of art. And so, there is a lot of case law already out there that helps determine what the legal term of art domicile means and how it's applied in different situations. But I would suggest that it might be useful for staff to provide maybe just a very summary memo or something for the mayor and council to kind of look at between now and final policy discussion, just so the non-lawyers can have like a little taste of how it would work under different scenarios, what the factors are. Because Neil's right. I mean, there are situations where someone would spend a portion of their time outside of the state and still be considered domiciled in Maryland. And again, it's a legal term of art. But I agree with Rob in terms of understanding how the intent is designed here is the moment someone is no longer domiciled in Gaithersburg as a matter of law and fact, they are no longer eligible to be on the council. And so they are automatically not a council member anymore or the mayor anymore. While it's true that someone has to kind of make note of that and sort of conclude based on the facts in the law that they are no longer domiciled, that it's sort of an automatic thing. So while it's true, someone has to actually kind of determine it. It's really something that's triggered, as a matter of the facts on the ground and in the applicable law. And I agree with Rob. The way I would see it working is if, the city attorney basically was alerted to this issue, looked at the facts in the law and concluded, yes, this person is no longer domiciled in the city as of X date, which means that as of X date, they're no longer a council member. And then that person could challenge that determination by filing a, petition for judicial review or some other legal action in the courts to have them reverse that determination. But otherwise, there would not be any legal proceeding to determine whether the person is domiciled or not. It would just be sort of city attorney's analysis. On the issue of the 5 meetings and the questions earlier about it being automatic versus the council having to take an action, the subcommittee, I think, felt that it was important that that one be an automatic to avoid situations where, a majority of the council is showing favoritism towards one member or another based on how they might vote with them on other issues, that it would be better to make it an objective process where it just happens automatically when these 5 meetings are missed without excuse. And, I think there was some discussion about whether we needed to take some sort of formal action. But again, I just think that introduces, the potential for too much gamesmanship and makes it too problematic. Not that any of us here today would do any of that, but, thinking in the long term down the road, creating laws and rules for the future and, different people serving on these in these positions. And then I just wanted to clarify, Lynn, I think my understanding is that when we say missing 5 meetings in a row, we're not including work sessions. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, these would just be regular mayor and council meetings.
Right. So it's only the every other weekly formal meeting that counts as one of the meetings that you can't miss 5 of in a row. So that sort of makes the bar even higher. So, I mean, I hope that kind of allays the concerns that people might have about this issue, in line with what the mayor said earlier, that it's sort of almost inconceivable that somebody who's elected to this position would miss that many meetings in a row without any kind of excuse or word at all. And then the last thing I wanted to point out, Lynn, I think in your introductory comments, you talked about how we can't make it stricter than what we introduced, but we can make it looser. And so when it comes to how many meetings you miss, the stricter is actually the lower number, not the higher number. So by making it a lower number at introduction, we can always amend it to be a higher number of missed meetings that would trigger somebody being removed, because a higher number in this case is actually a less strict rule.
I was thinking that too. And so,
Yeah.
I would be all for lowering that number right now before we introduce, but it's up to you guys.
Lowering meaning making it more strict.
Yes.
At introduction.
I would lower it to 3 meetings in a row.
And then
It's still inconceivable to me, but
yeah,
go
and
ahead.
then during public hearing and policy discussion, we could always decide, all right, after having considered it, maybe we want to make it 4 meetings or 5 meetings or 10 meetings in a row, whatever it is we want to make. It can be anything higher than what we introduce, but it can't be anything lower than what we introduce.
Correct.
So I just wanted to point that out.
Well, I
That's it.
mean, you could move to introduce if you like. Jim, or I see Jim's hand. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. While I completely understand the intent of saying, at 3 meetings, sure. I think it should be extraordinary steps to undo the will of the voters, even if people aren't fulfilling their obligation. I think that higher threshold is like, there's no question. 3, maybe you could have a question. 5, there's no question. That's my 2 cents.
All right. Well, would you like to move to introduce?
Unless there's other questions, I will move to introduce.
Okay. Do we have a second? Lisa Anderson.
I actually have a question. And I blame Ryan Spiegel for jumping down this rabbit hole I'm about to go down. For effective date. So when we talk about where a person is domiciled, if a person has not been domiciled, let's say for 6 months in the city of Gaithersburg, and it's brought to your attention, Lynn, by the time you do the investigation and figure it out, what's the effective date? And they truly are not. What's the effective date that person is no longer a council member? And what happens to any actions they've had during that time? Any votes or actions?
I mean, it would be the date that there's a determination made that they're no longer domiciled. So, I mean, it may be that there's a period of time where they weren't technically domiciled, but no determination had been made. So at that point, they are still a sitting council member or mayor. So, it would not void any of their prior actions.
Okay, so it's as date determined.
Correct.
Okay.
I will.
Great
We have a
question.
motion. Do we have a second? Ryan, I see you saying something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor. I was just saying that was a great question.
Well, while you're at it, would you like to second the motion?
I will. I will second. And just to be clear, my understanding is that I am seconding introduction of the resolution amending section 17 of the city charter.
That is correct.
Entitled reserved.
That is correct. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Wu.
I'm sorry.
Denise.
I thought you were lowering the number of the section during
No,
the introduction.
what you just observed was your mayor out on a limb. Nobody else is jumping on that.
Yeah,
So
all
it's
right.
being introduced
I'm sorry.
as
My
written.
apologies.
Okay, Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Aye.
And Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
Okay, that is now introduced. Lynn, all yours.
Thank you. The next 2 items are amendments to sections of the city code, specifically section 7A2, which deals with the Ethics Commission, and section 1713.1, which deals with the Personnel Review Board. When we get to the regulations, we've developed kind of detailed procedures to deal with complaints of sexual harassment and discrimination by mayor and council members. And the committee that did review this, we looked at, once there are allegations made, what is the proper hearing board to kind of hear the complaint and make a determination as to whether they believe that there are allegations, that the allegation should be sustained. So the the idea that the committee had was, we kind of toyed about, should it be the Ethics Commission or should it be the Personnel Review Board? Because each of those has expertise in different areas related to this issue. So I think the thought process was, because this is such a serious issue, that we would give those boards the authority to jointly hear a complaint of sexual harassment or discrimination by an elected official. And then that joint board would then make a recommendation to the mayor and council, who would then make the final determination as to whether sexual harassment or discrimination occurred. So the purpose of these two sections is to give both the Ethics Commission and the Personnel Review Board the authority to meet in this joint capacity and to hear complaints against mayor and council members in accordance with the regulations that are adopted by the council, and then to make recommendations to the mayor and council for action based on the complaints.
Thank you, Lynn. Questions, comments, or someone want to move the introduction?
And you need to do each of these separately.
Well, I'm referring to.
We need a motion for section 7A-2 and then a separate motion for 1713.1.
Okay, this is for 7A-2. Ryan, go ahead.
If there are no questions, Mr. Mayor, I'll move introduction of an ordinance to amend section 7A-2 of the city code.
Okay, Jim.
I just have one question. The policy or the procedure that's laid out, it's to make a recommendation to the mayor and council. Is the accused required to recuse themselves from a vote?
Yes, that's set out in the regulations.
Okay, I missed that. Thank you.
Yep.
So Jim, would you like to second the
I
introduction?
will then second.
Okay, I will call the roll. All those in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Aye.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
All right, carries 5-0. It is introduced. Go ahead, Lynn. Oh, we're just doing the motion, or any questions? Sorry, Lynn, you've already covered this. We're just doing any questions, comments, or the motion to introduce on section 17.13.1. Ryan.
Again, Mr. Mayor, if there are no questions from my colleagues, I'll move to introduce the ordinance to amend section 17 of the city code entitled Personnel.
Okay, do we have a second? Lisa.
I second.
Okay, I will call the roll. Councilmember Wu,
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel,
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty,
Aye.
and Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
Okay, carries 5-0. That is introduced, and let's talk about regulations, Lynn.
So last but not least, we have proposed regulations. The bulk of the regulations do provide details of how an investigation of a complaint of discrimination or harassment by an elected official would occur, ensuring that there's due process rights for all involved, and that there is a hearing and opportunity to present evidence and witnesses. So again, the bulk of the policy does deal with that process. Again, the investigation would then be sent to this joint board that would involve the Ethics Commission and the Personnel Review Board with a recommendation to the mayor and council. And then the mayor and council would decide whether the complaint is valid or not valid. This would be the one occasion where the mayor would have a vote, assuming that the mayor is not the accused in this particular case. And as we discussed in the last, whoever is the accused would not be able to participate in that type of action. It does set forth enforcement procedures. So in the event that there would be a finding that an elected official did violate the harassment or discrimination policy, there are a series of actions that could occur. And again, this would be by vote of the mayor and council. They could receive a cease and desist order. There could be remedial discrimination, harassment, training, removal from committees or other assignments, formal censure at a public meeting, or removal from office. So we've provided kind of a range of penalties from, not too intense to, obviously removal from office is a serious provision. It does also have provisions against retaliation for someone, prohibiting retaliation from someone who would file a claim or testify in that type of proceeding. There is a second section, which actually starts on page 196 of the packet, which deals with a little bit more kind of mundane policy issues from the mayor and council. We've already talked about section A, which is the meeting schedule. And this goes along with the charter amendment to section 6, which does give the mayor discretion to change the dates of regular meetings for holidays and also to schedule recesses in regular meetings. Subsection B deals with the excused absences, and this would be under charter section 17 of what would constitute an excused absence. So you wouldn't meet that, whatever the number you all finally determine, missing a certain number of meetings. Subsequent to the work session, we did add 2 new sections, which is subsection C and D. C deals with remote participation in meetings. This would allow members of the mayor and council to attend both regular meetings and work sessions remotely, up to 3 meetings per calendar year. And we've had put in a little bit of vague language that the manner of remote participation would be determined by the city manager based on the technology that is available. And then D deals with compliance with safety procedures. And really this is intended to address when we return to in-person meetings, that if there are policies or procedures in place for employees dealing with COVID, particularly vaccination, testing, masking, that those would also apply to the mayor and council in order to be able to attend in-person meetings. And then we have added some language that policies changed in the future to protect public health and safety for employees, that those would also be applicable to the mayor and council members. Since these are regulations, these are much more fluid. We can more easily make changes to these subsequent to introduction. You would also need to make a determination this evening as to whether you want to hold a public hearing on the regulations. You're not required to hold a public hearing, but section 2.10 allows you to hold a public hearing on them if you want to. Certainly for the charter and code changes that you all just introduced, public hearing is required for those. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Lynn. As to whether vote tonight or have a public hearing, since we're having a public hearing on all these related matters with charter, it makes sense to me just to include this set of regulations in that public hearing. We'll see what the council has to say. I saw Neil's hand go up first. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, my question is why the limitation of remote participation to 3 meetings per year? I think we are entering a new world where remote participation has been shown to be effective. So why would we want to limit that in any way, really? But 3 seems like a small number considering how many meetings we have.
Yeah, I think this was intended to, if the rest of the council was in person, that a council member or the mayor could attend remotely. And, again, 3 is certainly subject to your discretion if you think that should be more. I think there was some thought process, and these last 2 didn't really come out of the committee. This came out of more staff discussion. That did you really want one member to attend all meetings, remotely while everyone else is in person, or, what is a reasonable number? So certainly as we go through the public hearing process, we can look at that number to determine what's a more appropriate number.
Why is there an issue with attending meetings remotely at all at this point, even if meetings are in person?
Yeah, okay, understood the question. So how great a value do you place on our culture of civility here in the city of Gaithersburg? Because to me, part of team building is we show up to the meetings and there is a camaraderie from working together. If as Lynn suggested, we make it unlimited, and then somebody says, well, you know what, I'm not ever going to show up on Monday nights. I'm just gonna dial in the whole time. I think that damages our government. So I would argue that 3 basically gives each one of us a chance, if we're going to be out of town, if there's something that makes it inconvenient for us to attend a meeting, you get 3 chits that you can play when you need to. But really, our government's at its healthiest when we're together, we're in front of the public. That's the way it works.
Well, to think about the law of unintended consequences here, right? Let's say somebody's got business trips or vacations or whatever, and they want to log in remotely, but they've already used up their 3 remote logins. Therefore, it would probably be the best choice at that point, since they've used up their allocation, to just say, sorry, I can't make it this time. And I think that's a negative. You'd rather have people there than not there. So I think I understand what you're saying, and I wouldn't propose that I would intend or expect anyone else to attend meetings remotely as a matter of course. But it doesn't seem unreasonable to do it more frequently than 3 in a course of a year. And I just don't know how you pick an arbitrary number at this stage of the game. But that's otherwise the rest of the regulation seems fine.
Jim, go ahead.
I agree with Neil. I think we have entered a new world of the electronic communication is becoming a lot more the norm. And going forward, this might actually open up the door from an accessibility standpoint to people that might not have decided to run from office before because they couldn't go. This may allow, even a single mom or somebody who can't, commit to going in person every night, but they can do or every Monday night, but they could do a meeting from home that night. I think putting an arbitrary number is not, to Neil's point, is I think there are some benefits that we should consider to the future of the council, and maybe they don't use it every time, but if the decision is, well, I've only used 3 or I not go, if that person needed to, then they not go. I think the benefits outweigh the negatives, but that is my 2 cents.
Okay. I would argue that the arbitrary number that we've been living with all these years has been 0. And now what's here was proposed is 3, and that number could change, but I think the system was sort of designed not unlike the way jury trials or court trials are supposed to work, where we have to be in front of and accountable to the people that we serve, and that there's a physical element to that. But anyway, we'll go to Tanisha, and then we'll go back to you, Jen.
I just want to point out something that may be floating under the radar, which is prior to this year, recess was not a common thing that this body engaged in. And going forward, I think we've committed to, and you've introduced a mechanism that allows for a summer recess and a winter recess, which I think creates more flexibility around vacations and that sort of thing for people to miss, be out of town and not have to worry about managing a meeting. I just want to point that out as another factor to consider.
Thank you. We'll go back to Jim.
I was just going to say, considering I've only been on the council 2 months, I haven't had the benefit of being in person, and so far it is working, but I do look forward to being in person with everybody.
Fair enough. Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just try and offer a little perspective from the subcommittee. And this is not necessarily me speaking on my own behalf, but trying to sort of relay what the subcommittee as a whole had discussed. And I know Lynn was trying to remember whether it was a staff discussion or subcommittee discussion. I do remember a subcommittee discussion on this topic with former council member Sesma, myself, and kind of talking about that we wanted to incentivize council members to attend in person when they could. And Neil's and Jim's points are well taken in this era where we're having meetings all the time by Zoom. Why shouldn't we use the technology? But I tend to err on the side of the mayor's comments. I mean, I think we should be able to use the technology, but not in an unlimited fashion. And there needs to be some structural incentive to get people to show up in person at the meetings most of the time. And maybe 3 isn't the right number. Maybe it's 6. I don't know. And it can be easily changed because it's a regulation as opposed to a statute or charter amendment. And that's fine. Maybe we as a body decide we want to pick another number, and it doesn't have to be arbitrary. It can be more keyed to a percentage, a reasonable percentage of the total number of meetings that we have in a year. But I agree with everything the mayor said. You know, having been on the council a long time, and the vast majority of that time not being virtual, that there is an important element not only to the culture of a mayor and council or any body that's trying to build, a sense of camaraderie and teamwork, but in particular to a body that is a government legislative body that has to kind of, as the mayor said, well, have a physical presence to be accountable in front of the public. And I think it benefits an individual council member, and as well as benefiting the public, because the individual council member gets the benefit of building stronger and different types of relationships with their colleagues and with the public than they would be able to do simply by Zoom. Now, do I think it's likely that there would be a rogue council member out there who would try to go to every single meeting remotely? No, but I do think we ought to incentivize people to go in person to most of the meetings when they can. And, as to the point where, Jim was saying we would introduce, maybe candidates who otherwise wouldn't have considered running for public office because they'd be able to participate remotely. I mean, I think there's the flip side to that, which is that if a council member or a candidate approaches the job with an intent to do it that way, they're going to do themselves a disservice and not be able to be a full part of the council in terms of our camaraderie and teamwork building, and may ultimately end up doing a disservice to the role and to the public. Can it be done, from a sort of, what are the minimal requirements of being a council member? Yeah, it can be done, but it's not ideal. And so, I tend to agree with the mayor that there should be some limit, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 3 in my mind. It can be something else.
Thank you, Ryan. We'll go to Rob and then Lisa.
Thanks, Mayor. I had a few questions, but I'll chime in on that last point just so that we can have a clear guidance to the staff. And personally, I think that we should be in person as much as possible, but I also don't think that unless there's a technological hurdle to appearing virtually, that would put a difficulty on staff in order to do a hybrid session. I think we're all adults, we're all elected to represent, and therefore I don't think the regulations should lean one way or the other with respect to that. So I wouldn't be in favor of the cap. And so I do have some questions about the kind of the mechanisms for the complaint process, just to make sure it's clear in my head. So these are kind of Lynn questions. My reading is that the complaint process, that the director or anyone prior to it going to the joint committee doesn't have the discretion to just dismiss a complaint, that they have to intake the complaint, either investigated or non-investigated, but a report has to be generated and sent to the joint commission. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then as far as the joint commission's work product, is it just a recommendation sustaining or dismissing, or is it also a recommendation as to the enforcement mechanism, the enforcement?
It would include all of those. So they would also make a recommendation on enforcement.
Okay. So that's how I read it. And then I have 2 things that I want to make sure that we're not, for policy discussion, I want to make sure that what I'm saying would be narrower so that we don't have to reintroduce if it's something that gains traction.
I guess say for regulation, it doesn't matter. It can be broader or narrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's two things I'll just throw out there. And it's really geared towards kind of the politicization, the potential politicization of the process. Not saying that would ever happen with the current council. I do have concern about the removal from office provision in particular, and having a 4 vote, which would be, assuming full council is present, 1 is abstaining, it would be 4 out of 5. I would rather have that be a unanimous vote to remove from office. And then I'd also ask to consider a provision that if a recommendation from the joint board has a punishment in it, that nothing more severe can be approved by the council. Or if the joint board recommends dismissal of the complaint, that the council cannot then vote to sustain the complaint. And I'm just kind of modeling that after the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I think it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We'll go to Lisa.
Thank you. And Rob addressed some of my question already. It is in terms of remote versus physical meetings, and I've only had the experience of being virtual in council meetings, but is it a burden on staff? Because I assume that we would also allow the public then to attend virtually. So would it be a burden on staff to manage both who's physically in the room, the public and council and the mayor, and who's on virtually? So just as something to consider.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to? I can respond to that. I mean, we've explored all of the options. It really depends on which facility we're using, which is why there's the general language included that it would be subject to the technology available. So there's different capabilities and capacity available at City Hall than there will be at 16th South Summit once we move there. But all of it's manageable, just in different, there's different ways to get at it. So there's no additional administrative burden.
Okay.
That's not, I don't believe that's the motivation behind the cap. I think the cap is sort of structured to be a policy decision among the mayor and council of how many meetings you can participate remotely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so this is not something on which we have to decide tonight. This is only a preview of the discussion that we can have holistically with the charter amendments that sort of feed into these regulations. Lynn, do you need anything from us? Do you need a vote to send this to public hearing?
We do need a vote to introduce and then also to send it to public hearing. And that can be combined in one motion.
Okay, Ryan.
Mr. Mayor, I move to introduce the regulations and hold a public hearing on them.
Okay, do we have a second? Rob.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. All in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Aye.
Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Carries 5-0. Consider it introduced. Let me move on to the next item here, which is staff guidance. And I believe we are calling up Chris Berger. Tech team, if you could bring up Chris Berger, that would be great.
Trying to promote Chris. It's not happening. I'm working on it.
Okay. Greg, we have you here. Welcome. I don't know if you want to get us started on this while we're waiting to try to work out with. Oh, here comes Chris. You're not on the spot anymore, Greg. Chris, welcome. Go right ahead.
Good evening. If tech team can pull up packet page 201. Staff seeks your sponsorship to amend Chapter 24, Article 12 of the City Code titled Preservation of Historic Resources. Staff presented potential code changes to you and the Planning Commission during a joint work session on August 23rd. Both you and the Planning Commission concurred that there was sufficient need to amend the Preservation Code. Staff sought input from the Historic District Commission on the proposed changes at both the HDC's June 23rd and November 22nd meetings, and the HDC supported the changes. Staff proposes the following changes to Chapter 24, Article 12. We can go to the next page, please. The process to designate or remove historic designation is not clear under Section 24-226. The process begins with a petition to designate from either the Mayor and City Council, Planning Commission, the Historic District Commission, or the property owner, followed by a triple public hearing. After that, the Historic District Commission and Planning Commission provide recommendations to the Mayor and City Council before the Mayor and City Council takes final action. Staff does not seek to remake the process so much as to clarify it. For example, the code does not specify that the triple public hearing includes the Mayor and City Council, Planning Commission, and Historic District Commission. The benefits of this change will help the Mayor and City Council, staff, the HDC, the Planning Commission, and the public clearly understand the processes. We can go to the next page, please. So continuing in that same code section, should not be easy to remove historic designation from a property, but staff is concerned that it is nearly impossible to remove designation if a property no longer meets the applicable criteria. So staff would like to improve the designation removal requirements and still protect the city's historic resources. We'd like to allow the Mayor and City Council to remove designation in the following situations. If a property owner demonstrates the resource through demolition, alteration, or loss of integrity, has lost its historic qualities and no longer meets the criteria for designation, or removal of designation is necessary to accomplish the goals of the master plan and/or the city's strategic directions, or removal of designation for undue economic hardship when there is no reasonable use of the property and the hardship is not because of the property owner's own neglect. This code section received the most discussion at the August 23rd work session. The consensus was that the proposed changes would provide the Mayor and Council with more flexibility, but designation removal should rise to a higher standard and be limited. As a result of the hearing, staff added language that designation could only be removed if a supermajority of council members voted in favor. Next page, please. The code allows the HDC to grant staff the ability to approve certain categories of work, and the HDC did just that in 2019. Staff now seeks to add those administrative approvals to the code so there is a record of the permitted approvals. Next page, please. We'd like to eliminate code sections that are no longer relevant. Impact review areas are properties adjoining historic resources where the Historic District Commission may make recommendations to the Planning Commission on site development applications. The code section was approved in 1996 when the existing historic preservation article of the City Code was established, but the Mayor and Council have never enacted impact review areas. Staff is confident that the existing code requirements and site plan review process will limit the effect any potential development may have on properties that adjoin historic resources, and would like to eliminate the section of the code on impact review areas. Next page, please. The process by which the Historic District Commission can hold up a demolition permit for structures 50 years old or older and petition the Mayor and City Council to designate a property as historic is not clear. We'd like to add the HDC must petition the mayor and city council by resolution, and that the mayor and city council must vote to accept the petition before the designation process may be initiated. Further, we seek to amend the code to give the mayor, the city manager, or designee the ability to release a demolition permit if the mayor and city council denies the HDC's petition. This section should cross-reference the designation process that we talked about earlier under section 24-226. We also want to add a time limit on a demolition review. Next page, please. Finally, if we are going to alter the city code, there are other minor changes that we'd like to address, and the examples are listed on this page. So should the council sponsor this amendment, a joint public hearing with the Planning Commission is tentatively scheduled for the mayor and city council meetings, the mayor and city council's meeting on February 7th. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much for the presentation, Chris, and for taking the guidance of the mayor and council and turning it into these suggested text amendments. Do we have questions or comments? Neil Harris.
So I don't really have any significant questions. I think that these changes are all very warranted and will be useful in streamlining the process going forward. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this. The only question I have is, and it's not really a major quibble, but the requirement for a supermajority to remove designation. It seems like the idea is that this is so important that it requires a supermajority compared to other actions that can be passed with a simple majority of the council. Why do we feel that this is that critical?
Well, essentially, to remove designation is undoing the actions of a previous council. So we want to make sure that there is a supermajority, there is a overwhelming desire to remove that designation, because they are saying that the designation no longer meets the criteria that were approved by a previous council. So it is a pretty serious situation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Neil. Any other questions or comments, or someone wants to move to sponsor the amendment, the text amendment? Neil.
I'd like to move to sponsor the text amendment.
Okay, do we have a second? Rob.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. All those in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Council Vice President Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember McNulty.
Aye.
And Councilmember Henderson.
Aye.
All right, carries 5-0. Consider it sponsored. Thank you very much, Chris and Greg.
Sponsored with a supermajority.
Yes, indeed. Next, we have from the city attorney.
To say nothing further for me this evening.
Okay, and I received a text message from Deputy City Manager Enslinger saying that there was nothing from other staff. So I will remind everybody, let me just pull up the announcement here. Here we go. I will remind everyone that we have no work session next week on January 10th, but there are workshops happening with the mayor and council on both January 10th and January 13th. And then the next regular meeting of the mayor and council will be on Tuesday, January 18th, because of the holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day on January 17th. And until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.